Hi and welcome. I'm going to give you a brief tutorial about how to begin using R. The first thing that you'll have to do is actually download R. And there's a lot of different apps that you can use for using R. I like to use R Studio. So that's what I'll use today. You can download that, and when you open it, you'll see that there are kind of three sections of your screen. It looks like this. In those three sections, what you'll see is that the screen on the left is your console, and that's going to be where you're actually running your code. So, for example, you can play around with writing a simple equation. You could say 2 plus 2, and then type enter, and you'll get a result. Yeah, you just present enter at the end, and there you get the answer is 4. So the console is great and can be used for entering in your commands and getting some output or running your code. But often what we want to do is actually save our code. It's part of the reason for using R in the first place, or code in general, is to be able to reproduce the analysis instead of doing an analysis kind of live and then realizing at the end that you've made an error with the data or something in the beginning and having to go back and do it again. The advantage here is that you can save a script that you can run over and over again. There's a number of different kinds of scripts that you can use. The one we'll talk about today is an R script, which is just a kind of a simple text that saves your code, and you can run your code, open it in R Studio and run it. So by either clicking on a line or highlighting a section of code. So if I do that, you'll see that my console gets divided, so the console shows up in the bottom left, and on the top you can see the script. And in the script, I can write commands that I think I'd like to use, and then run it. And you can run it by either clicking and pressing Command Enter, or highlighting a larger chunk of code and clicking on Command Enter again. And then what you'll see is that bit of code runs down in your console. So you just saw me type 2 plus 2, and then I ran it, and you saw the output down in the console. So the same kind of idea, could apply. Anytime I'm writing code, I could either choose to write it in the console or choose to write it in a script that I'll save for later. So as we're analyzing data, which is the larger goal, I'm going to give you an example here that you can refer back to. And so our example experiment is looking at whether deaf kids have their ASL skills are related to their math skills. And we have different groups of deaf students. Some are going to a school for the deaf, and some are going to a mainstream school. And the way that often the data comes in is in an Excel spreadsheet, like a CSV. I like to organize the data so that each row is for a child and each column is for a variable. In the data that I'll use here today, I have a column for the student ID number, a column for the type of program that they're in, the mainstream program or a deaf school, a column for signing skills, and a column for math skills. Each column should have there should be one header row, and each column should have a label at the top. So you can see an example of the data here. So I strongly suggest not using anything like color coding or anything like that in your spreadsheets. And I also suggest that you not edit your spreadsheets in Excel directly. It can be really tempting to just, fix one little thing or, make a change in your spreadsheet. But when you do that, it's not traceable. and it's hard to, in a week from now when you forgot what you were doing, figure out what you had intended with those changes and what those changes were. If you make changes in R, then it's much easier to go back and figure out what you did and to change it and reproduce it. So I encourage you to leave the CSV alone. Don't touch it, and use R to do all of your data manipulation. That should give you a record of what you've done so far and how your analysis has proceeded. So what you'll need to do is to get your data in from a CSV, and so you'll use a line of code, something like this. Like learning any language, learning R is a matter of learning the symbols and kind of translating it to the language that you already know. So in this case, we have a sentence in R, and I'm going to make up a word, my data. That made up word is kind of a variable, not the kind of variable like a column, but just a variable as in a placeholder. In coding in general, variable typically means some kind of a placeholder. It could be a letter or a word, something like that, that now once you assign it to something, now stands for something else. So I'm going to make this word, my data, stand for my data when I read it in. So I use that made up word, my data. Could have been anything, but I'm going to use my data. And then I use that arrow symbol, which I'll call gets, or it's like an assigns. And so that means that whatever comes to the right of that arrow is assigned to the variable my data. So I do that using a function, and the function is called read CSV. So read CSV, and then most functions have parentheses. And inside this function, what it's expecting is for me to tell it where that file is. So I can give it a path name. There's a lot of different ways to read in data and where to read in data. This may not be the best way of doing it, but it's one simple way of doing it. So say my data is saved in a folder. I need to tell R where it is that it's saved. I'm going to show you how to find that on that path name, that address for the file. I'll show it to you on a Mac. I'm not sure what it should be on a PC, but what you're going to need to do is just find your file location. So here's how you do it. So now I've made something new called my data, and that's going to match what I had in the CSV. So I'll show you that in a second. If you look at my screen in that top right corner, you're going to see all of the variables that I've created so far in this session. Right now, it's just going to be my data is the only variable that I've made so far. And if I click on it, you can explore more about that data frame. And you can see here that it matches what I had in my Excel file, my CSV file, when I opened it in Excel. So now I have my data read in, and I'm ready to start playing around with it. There are a lot of different kinds of things I might want to do. One kind of simple first step might be to get some descriptive information about the data. So say I want the average of the signing skills of the students in this data set. I can type a function called mean, and then inside the function, so inside the parentheses, I have to tell it what do I want to calculate the mean over. In this case, I want to calculate it over the column ASL score. So to refer to that column, I say it's in the data frame called my data, and then the $sign And then the word after that is the column name. So the column name is ASL score, and that's going to tell it to calculate the mean over the column ASL score, which is in the data frame called my data. That's a nice simple way of getting an average for something, but often I don't want just to get one average. I'd really like to get averages and descriptive information for all of the columns that makes sense to calculate for. So I can use the command summary. So the command is summary, and the function, and then inside the parentheses there, I have to tell it what to summarize. I'm going to tell it to summarize the data that's in my data, that data frame. So each column, it's going to give me a summary of the different kinds of information for each variable. It's important to know what types of data you're working with. Each column is going to have a different type of data, potentially. The ASL skills is a number. It's a score on a scale of from 0 to 100. And that means that I can calculate an average over it. I can do all sorts of things like you would with a bunch of numbers. Same thing for the math score. That's a scale of 0 to 100, so I can calculate an average over that. Type of program is deaf school versus a mainstream school, and that's not a number. That's categories. It's a categorical variable, and R calls that a factor. So they're different groups. That's a different kind of data, and the way that you're going to deal with and interact with those data are different because it's a category. If you're not sure what type of data you're dealing with, you're going to have to deal with, you'll say type of, and then insert the column name there. And you'll say what type of data it is. So it could be one of the ones that we've seen. It could be another one. It could be something like a string, which is just a series of characters. Another way of getting the type of data is to use a function called glimpse. And what that will do is tell you for your entire data frame what type of data you're dealing with. It's a nice kind of quick snapshot of the whole data set or the whole data frame. Another tip is that, well, Google is a really great place to go and find help. If you have a function that you think you might want to use but aren't exactly sure how to use it, you're not sure what the inputs are, what you put in the parentheses, or you don't know what the outputs are going to be, what the results are once you run the function, how you're supposed to use the results, you can, as long as you know the name of the function, you can type question mark and then put the function name, and on the bottom right you'll get a little help file that gives you some information about how to use it, what the inputs are, what the outputs are. Sometimes it'll even include some examples of how to use the code and how to apply it. So the help function is super useful. Good luck. I wish you the best of luck and hope you're off to a good start.